about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. This broadcast is being brought to you live from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. This morning, we're pleased and honored to have Mr. Dr. Robert Lawson as our guest. He holds the Jerome M. Fullenwider Endowed Centennial Chair in Economic Freedom and is director of the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom in the Cox School of Business. Dr. Lawson is a co-author of the widely cited Economic Freedom of the World Annual Report, which presents economic freedom index for over 150 countries. He has numerous professional publications, has earned his BS in economics from the Honors Tutorial College at Ohio University, has MS and PhD in economics from Florida State University. Go Seminoles. In his spare time, he enjoys running, ultra-marathoning, mountaineering, and vintage baseball and cooking, a man after my own heart. Today we'll be discussing the widely held Economic Freedom Index annual report. Dr. Lawson, thank you so much for being on our program today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, I have to admit, I appreciate the fact that you're a marathoner. I've completed a couple of marathons, but I should do triathlons. I never had the stamina to go any further than 26 miles running. But I am a veteran of 9 triathlons, so I feel your pain, by the way.
Well, I would die if I had to run a triathlon. I'd drown in the water myself. So
well, that was my problem.
Dry land.
I remember my last triathlon, I actually got lost in the water. And they had to bring out a guy with a surfboard, and they came out to retrieve me, and they sort of nudged me over to turn me around, and I got off last in the water. But I was so proud because I was so angry with myself for doing such a stupid thing that I decided to count how many bikers that I passed, and I passed 38 bikers before I finished, and I felt so proud of my accomplishment at that time. Anyway, that's great. Thank you so much for being on our show. Could you give us some background as to how you got involved in the Economic Freedom Index, something that I read every year, or I reference at least, and its composition and how you got involved in that in the first place?
Well, like a lot of things, it came down to dumb luck. I was a graduate student at Florida State University, and my professor, Jim Gorton, he walked into my office and said, I just came back from this fantastic meeting in California with Milton Friedman. Wow, Milton Friedman, he's big. And wow. We're going to do an economic freedom index. So that was it. I was basically his worker bee as a graduate student.
I see.
So this is like 1990 or so. And this is before the internet, so we got dusty books out of the library, started typing numbers into a primitive spreadsheet, and we cobbled together, it was a primitive index, maybe 40 countries, 10 variables. We took it to California again, and I met Milton Friedman, and next thing you know, we're publishing this book every year for the last 25 years. So.
Well, that's interesting. Now, I have not read the book itself, but I have referenced the index itself. What are some of the criteria that go into deciding the ranking within the index?
Well, I mean, philosophically, what we're trying to do is trying to put a number on how economically free a country is. And by economic freedom, we mean basically what normal people call capitalism or laissez-faire. Right. Free markets, anything like that. Now, operationalizing that's the trick. So our goal all along, though, was to try to use actual hard data. We didn't want to be involved in sort of a subjective rating system. You know, I'm a product of the American public schools, so I can barely find most of these countries on a map, you know. and it just doesn't make sense for a bunch of, American professors to, try to put a number on Uganda and things like that. So we said, if we're going to do this, we're going to use data. So ours is a data-driven index. I collect numbers from evil organizations like the World Bank and IMF and sometimes even the UN and World Economic Forum, very mainstream data sources on everything from tariffs to taxes, inflation rates. We do use some survey data that other people do. For example, the World Bank has a sort of survey on how hard it is to start a business and things like that. And so we sort of put all these numbers. Now there's 42 variables in the index in 157 countries. So it's a huge data project now. And I could talk about the methodological details, but I suspect you and your listeners don't want to hear that. But basically, we put all these numbers in the computer. I kind of turn the grinder, and zeros and 10 to 10 numbers come out. So Hong Kong is number 1; they get a 9, and right now Venezuela is dead last. They get I think a 3 out of 10.
If you
put
told
all
the
numbers
average
in there and you get numbers.
Yeah, if you told the average American Hong Kong obviously is part of China, and they came out number 1 in the Freedom Economic Index, they would think you were a lunatic. I mean, they could not process that. I mean, I agree with you. I understand that. I've known that for some time, but I mean, it's so antithetical. I mean, it's the exact opposite of what you would expect where Hong Kong would come out. Although Hong Kong was sort of like a colony of China because it was occupied by the British, but what maintained China retains China's freedom to exceed the freedom index of the United States? What was that one variable?
I got to repeat that again. I'm sorry about
Hong Kong is number 1. I know we're not number 1, and we'll talk about that a little later. But what was the one indicator, one item that places Hong Kong among everyone else?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not one indicator. It's practically every indicator.
Okay.
I mean, whether you're talking about taxes, give you one example. Taxes in Hong Kong, the top tax rate is 15%.
Wow.
That's what rich people pay.
Yeah.
So in the United States, as you know, depending on what state you live in, it could get to 50%.
Right.
For the top tax rate. In France, it's like 60 or 70% now. So there's just one indicator, but really it's across the board. I mean, if you and I were in a court dispute, I'd rather be in front of a Hong Kong judge than a Texas judge.
I see.
So they don't have any tariffs at all. It's complete free trade. So obviously they get top scores there. It takes 1 day, according to the World Bank, it takes exactly 1 day to start a business in Hong Kong. I mean, just a day. In some countries, it takes 30, 40, 50. Some countries, 1,000 days to start a business legally.
I think John Stossel, didn't he go to Hong Kong and start a business in just a couple of hours' time? John Stossel,
Yes, that's
did,
right. Stossel did that on TV once.
Yeah, right. I remember seeing that. Yeah. Now there are something like depending on what you want to consider a nation, because there are small nation states that are the size of a postage stamp, but there are a little over 200 countries in the world. I think 208 is the official count, but I'm not certain. That changes from time to time. Now, your index includes only 100. Which one did you eliminate, and why did you do so?
Yeah, it's 157, and the main reason is data. I mean, the classic examples for us are countries like Cuba and North Korea. I mean, I have no doubt where Cuba and North Korea go on an economic freedom index,
right.
But there's simply no data. I mean, they're not in the World Bank, they're not in the IMF. The World Economic Forum isn't allowed to do their business person survey there. So these countries are just not in the index. So there are a lot of countries that, I don't have Afghanistan and Iraq, Somalia. These are basically places where you just don't get any data. Yeah. I could probably, no one would probably complain if I just threw them in at the bottom of the index. But, again, we're trying to be pretty scholarly about this. And without actual data, we just don't want to, throw them in there.
Yeah. And now, where does the United States stand at this point in time? Are we like number 12 or something like that?
That's where it's a little bit worse than that. In terms of rankings, we're 16th in the current index, and it's been going down. I mean, that's the big news for the index is that in 2000 we scored the United States second in the world, behind Hong Kong.
Wow!
And starting in 2000 and every year afterwards, the U.S. number began to fall. I mean, wasn't at first. It was not a big deal. We fell from second to third and to fourth. You figure these are just numbers that are wiggling around a little bit, and But then it's in the low single digits, and then it was in the low, 11 or 12, and now 16. And if you look at the ratings, the actual 0 to 10s, we've gone down by over a point. And that's it doesn't mean anything, really to a normal person. What's a point of economic freedom? But that's a big drop. It is the largest drop over that period.
I see.
And you don't want to be on any list where Venezuela's on that list. So the U.S. has really fallen a lot in the last, say, 15 years.
Now, do you ever approach our illustrious leaders and say, "Hey guys, why don't you take a look at this and maybe this will give you a clue as to what is going on, if you can wake up long enough." Do you ever have these conversations with these clowns or what?
Well, I tell you, I'm an academic. I mostly want to talk to other academics and sit in my office and write journal articles that no one reads. But we do have a network of about 90 think tanks that work with us.
Yeah.
They're co-publishers. And I sort of look at it's their job, really, to take the message to the politicians. And, in the United States, the Cato Institute is our local partner, and the main publisher is the Fraser Institute in Canada. They're the sort of mothership. That's what they do. And they use the index numbers to sort of, roll up the newspaper and beat the noses of these dogs.
Okay, so you publish it and you say, Ottawa. Go, girl, go, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to say that we've changed the world with this product. It's not at all that obvious, though. When the U.S. has gone from 2nd to 16th, it's pretty clear that we haven't actually, achieved our objective in the United States, anyway.
It's interesting. Now, I watched only a part of the presidential debates because, quite frankly, I don't have the stomach for it, and I watch as much as I could, and then I get to a point where I start shaking and I turn the TV off and I say, I'll never do that again. But at least the portion that I watched, maybe a little bit more than half of the debates, no one ever brought this up. The fact that, they always say we're the greatest country in the world, but no one ever retorted by saying, wait a minute, we're number 16 on the World Freedom Economic Index. How did that happen? Did someone, or did I miss it somewhere?
Well, I'll tell you, you watched, by the way, infinitely more of those debates than I did. But you're right, though. I mean, it really is frustrating right now, and I'm not a Republican. I'm a recovered Republican, but I'm not one now. But I think this country needs at least one of the two parties to be a spokesperson for economic freedom.
Right.
For the ability of the people to go about their economic lives without a lot of interference. Buy, sell, trade, hire, fire, import, export. We shouldn't. We should be able to do these things freely. We should be able to speak our minds freely. We should be able to worship the God of our choice freely, and we should be able to import and export freely. But right now, maybe except for Rand Paul, maybe, but there really is no voice in the Republican Party that's talking that kind of talk. In fact, it's like one party says, "Hey, we're gonna, we're gonna drive over the cliff at 50 miles an hour," and the other one says, "No, we're gonna do it at 45 miles an hour." It's like, well,
right.
So, I'm not political at all. I don't vote. I don't pay any attention to this stuff. But I really do think that the nation needs to hear the voice. Some political voice needs to be out there in the mainstream for advocating for economic freedom.
Well, you mentioned you're a product of the public school system, so you don't know your geography. I mean, and that's so accurate. Unfortunately, because the talk show hosts sometimes go on the street and ask people, where's Philadelphia, or something like that, and people have no idea. They is that in Hong Kong? They have no idea what's going on, and it's true. We're a very uneducated population, and our school system, as far as I'm concerned, we should shut it all down, the entire system down, 100%. We shouldn't leave one brick standing. But and because we have nothing to show for it other than abject ignorance, in my opinion. Now, in the Freedom Index, what has been the major driving force that has been lowering the standing of the United States? What was that one item? Was there one item, or is there a compilation of items?
Yeah, it's a compilation, but the big one, the one that's really caused the biggest numerical decline, is our second area in the index, and it's the property rights and rule of law area.
Wow.
So it's not what everyone thinks it is. Everyone wants, I mean, Republicans will say, well, it must be taxes are up. And, taxes are up a little bit in the last 15 years, but that's not really it. It's the rule of law and property rights. And you have to, I mean, here I admit, our numbers are very broad, and they don't really pinpoint exactly what's going on. But think about what's happened in the last 15 years. I mean, now you got to take your shoes off at the airport. I mean, we have airports that are basically Constitution-free zones. We have the Kelo decision, which lets the government take someone's property to give it to someone else.
Right.
Terrible
decision.
Chrysler and GM bondholders basically getting screwed by President Obama. Right. And to be fair, Bush would have done the same thing. So, we've had just one case after another of, I think, an assault on people's property rights and basically the rule of law. I mean, the Chrysler bailout and the GM bailout is a classic example. I mean, I teach my students, we have a perfectly good, it's not good, perfect, but we have a very sound system for handling bankruptcy. And the companies are bankrupt, so you go to court and everybody tries to get the money that they're owed.
Right. But
we didn't do it then. The president stepped in and says, no, these companies are too important to let the regular law work. Well, that's a deep violation of the rule of law in this country.
Right.
And it's not just that; it's like a dozen different cases that I can think of. We have one variable in the index. It comes from the World Economic Forum. That's that sort of very mainstream group that meets in Davos, Switzerland, and they do a survey and they ask business people about favoritism from government and irregular payments. It's just bribes. And the U.S. number was a 9, and now it's a 6 or 7 out of 10. And that's just frightening right there. That's Banana Republic type numbers.
I see.
So,
well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I sort of broke into your train of thought. That's why I stopped speaking.
Well, I was just going to add to that then that, if it was taxes or tariffs or even inflation, if these were the problems, it's pretty easy for me as an economist to give advice to the government. Well, if taxes are too high, well, cut taxes. Right. I'm not saying that's politically easy, but it's technologically easy to just cut taxes.
Right.
If it's inflation, well, then just don't print so much money. I mean, it's not that hard to fix. How do you fix the rule of law? I mean, it's not like you just pass a new law or, how do you fix the sense that the United States is now a corrupt, crony, Banana Republic type system?
Right.
That is a much deeper rooted problem than policy problems like tariffs and taxes.
But none of the politicians that are running for office are even approaching that subject whatsoever. They just say, they make comments like, I love my country, and I want to do even more for the American people, et cetera, all this, gobbledygook. But they don't mention anything of substance. And what you are speaking of is of those subjects of substance that really need to be addressed. And if they're never brought forward, then they're never addressed, they'll never be corrected. I mean, people are not even aware that they exist because we're the frogs in the warm water bit where the heat keeps on being turned up and we feel perfectly comfortable in where we are. And then if someone does come forward and mention these things, the person hates America, has a negative attitude, and would be, just terrible for our children or whatever. And I find this very disturbing. I don't know how we turn this around or if it's possible to turn it around. Is part of your economic World Economic Index is the national debt? Is that part of it?
We have one variable. It's a very small weight on the overall index that really is just looking at the deficits. We don't have the debt as such, but the annual deficit.
Deficits, right? Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that's one of the areas where the U.S. number has gone down. It doesn't carry a lot of weight in the index. So, but I mean, it was, during the surplus years of the Clinton era, it was a 10 out of 10 because you're running a surplus. But then it went down to 2 out of 10. I think it's maybe crept up to about 4 or something.
Yeah, well, because I'm reading Michael Tanner's book, the senior fellow from the Cato Institute, Going for Broke. And if you look at the charts in that book, it looks like in the years to come, the deficit, not the debt, but the deficit, yearly deficit, will continue to start rising once again and will become totally unmanageable. Now, if this holds true, what happens to our standing in the index when we have no ability in which to even pay our bills?
Well, it's absolutely going to hurt the index, if the deficit goes up. The other thing is we've actually done some primary research around the world at sovereign debt ratings. And one of the things that we find is that if you have lower economic freedom ratings, you'll end up having higher borrowing costs for the government. So it's sort of a double whammy. You borrow more, which lowers your economic freedom rating, but then the world sees you have less economic freedom, so then they raise the amount of interest that you're required to pay.
Right.
So it's kind of a vicious circle that country, and you see that countries like Greece that they can get into, they borrow, which it sort of feeds into the problem. That's definitely a possibility. I think in the United States context, it's in terms of the way the index is constructed, it wouldn't be a huge factor. I mean, compared to the property rights and rule of law things, which have really driven the declines, this would, drop it by 1/10 of a point or something on the way we scale things. We have a lot of variables in this index.
Well, we're dropping. Who's actually improving, but not on a relative scale, because if we're dropping and someone else improves, that means they can stay in the same place. And if they're just as bad as they were before, they have really improved. We've just gotten worse. Are any countries improving, and what are they doing to improve their standings?
You see, almost all countries are improving over the very long run. We have numbers back to the 70s. So, I mean, if you compare the world numbers in the 70s and 80s with today, they're much higher today. And we have to remember how bad economic policy was around the world. When I was a student, I mean, this is the era where we were countries around the world were nationalizing industries. Tax rates were much higher. Tariff rates were much higher.
Right.
We had hyperinflation in dozens of countries. Right now, there's hyperinflation in maybe one country in the world, Venezuela. I mean, it's the only country in the world that you could call it.
Well, Hungary and Poland had hyperinflation back in the 40s and 50s, didn't they?
Yeah, but right now, we have literally one country, whereas, 20 years ago, we had 15, 20, 30, 40 countries that had significant problems there. So, I mean, it was really bad in the old days, and most of these countries kind of figured it out. They got their monetary systems under control. They lowered taxes. They privatized a lot of industries. And so you saw, I mean, then, of course, the breakup of the Soviet Union took, a couple dozen countries and thrust them from the world's sort of worst economic freedom conditions to at least something that's better.
Right.
And some of those countries are really good now. Georgia, the country of Georgia, is ranked 11th on the index.
Wow. Okay.
It was a Soviet republic 25 years ago, so, that's pretty impressive. Estonia is in the top 15. So some of the Soviet republics have really moved quickly to economic freedom. Now, they're still pretty poor, especially Georgia, because they've always been poor, but they've been growing very quickly since then.
Yeah. And what type of actions have these countries taken in general to improve their standings?
The biggest thing has been lowering tariffs. I mean, you see huge improvements. This is a result of the World Trade Organization, GATT, the old days it was GATT, of worldwide reductions in tariffs and quotas, which is making it easier for them to, if they're people to trade with the rest of the world. So that's one of the biggest areas. But again, I mentioned the tax rate thing. It's been we remember the Reagan tax cuts and the Thatcher tax cuts.
Right.
But this actually happened in about 50 countries. I mean, Reagan and Thatcher get sort of headlines, but in something like 50 countries in the world, we saw huge declines. tax rates going from 50%, top tax rates going from 50% to going down to 20%, 25%. In Eastern Europe, most of the countries of Eastern Europe have low and flat taxes. So that's been the big area. Those kind of areas, tariffs and taxes are down. And also, again, I mentioned the inflation. We've except for Venezuela right now, we've basically killed inflation as a significant threat to people's savings.
Isn't inflation down worldwide currently because there's a worldwide retraction overall? I mean, people don't have the money to spend. I mean, we should have shot that wad out the window, and now we realize that we just don't have the economic capacity to keep the ball going at the same rate, or the production at the same rate, especially buying from China and whatever.
Well, I suppose that's true. I mean, during economic recessions or contractions, inflation tends to go down or disinflation occurs. But this is something that we killed back in the booms of the 80s and 90s. So, the inflation rates have basically come down on a secular level all around the world. And you're right. Right now, in the current period, some of the low inflations we're seeing are just driven by the business cycle. But it's been about 20 some years now that the world basically has gotten off of the inflation bandwagon, and I don't think that's related to the current crisis.
Yeah, well, with inflation, and I'm not an advocate of inflation. In fact, our best times is when we were in deflation, which was over 100 years ago, and that's because productivity was up. Prices went down because people had more money to spend, and that wasn't inflationary, that was deflationary, and we had a very strong economy, unless my economics isn't correct, and you can correct me if you want, please do. But we have this notion that Janet Yellen has this notion that she has a 2% inflation target, which for some reason, every time she says that, like my brain hurts. I go, where did she pick out this number, and why 2%? Why not 0? And why not lift all boats? Why not make everything more valuable and less costly? And why do we need any inflation in the first place? And could you please explain to me where she gets this 2% mantra, and why this is so important, and why I can't understand it at all? I mean, there's something wrong with my thought process.
Yeah, well, I first of all, I will express some sympathy with your first remark. I mean, I think that when you have deflation that's driven by long-run economic growth, basically more goods chasing fewer dollars, that kind of deflation is there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually a signal of economic health.
Right.
And you're right. The 19th century was characterized by that. The problem is there's also the deflations that are associated not with long-run economic health but short-run problems. And the economics profession, the Janet Yellens of the world, bless their hearts, as they say here in the South, are just hopelessly short-run oriented. As John Maynard Keynes said, and they think in the long run we're all dead. So their focus is entirely about this 6-month quarter, the next 2 quarters, and in that context, that short-run oriented thinking, deflation is bad. It's associated with bad things like business cycle depressions.
Well, yeah, the deflation is always associated with a depression, and that gives deflation a bad rap, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's right. And again, I think there's 2 kinds of deflations. There's the good kind, the kind we had in the 19th century, which was driven by stable monetary environment and just a lot of productivity. And then there's the bad kind of deflation, the kind like we had in the Great Depression, and the kind, frankly, like we might be having now. It's not literally deflation, but it's almost deflation. And so, again, the politicians and the economists who get involved in politics, and that's what Fed chairman, people in the Fed are basically politicians. They don't care about long-run economic growth. They say they do, but the reality is they care about the next 2 quarters, the next unemployment report on the Friday of the first month, and so for them, deflation in that kind of very narrow context is a negative thing, and they want to avoid it. Why 2%? I don't know. Why not 3%? Why not? What these numbers are made up, but their focus is not on long-run prosperity. Their focus is on very, very short-term cyclical kinds of things. And to give a sort of a natural science kind of metaphor, I sort of look at the product we do with this Economic Freedom Index. We're like climatologists. We're studying, the glaciers and these Fed people, they're studying weather. Weather's important. You need, if it's going to rain today, it's nice to have an umbrella.
Right.
But really, climate's more important. That's how I sort of look at the economic freedom things. Like, we're talking about, 10, 20, 30-year generational length trends that matter much more than 2 or 3 year business cycle recessions. But then again, I'm not a Fed chairman, so I just don't have the same incentives, same world. We're in the same world.
If I had to debate Janet Yellen, I know exactly what my approach would be. My contention would be she's wrong. The target inflation rate should not be 2%. It should be 1.9. And I'd have her defend that. Defend her position. I mean, but one is as ludicrous as the other, and that's what I would do. I said, no, I think it should be 1.9. I would make up some stupid, ridiculous, and I'll bet you she'll even respond to it. I don't know where she gets that from. Quite frankly, I don't think the woman knows how she got that position is. I don't know. I don't know why she doesn't get up and say, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever what we're doing. I mean, if I tried to articulate it in a regular English language, not in Fed speak, I could never do it in a million years. You wouldn't understand it because I don't understand it, and that would be the truth. I don't know why we can't speak the truth in Washington. We have to have this funny language. It just drives me nuts. But Robert, could we ask you just to hold on for a minute? We do have a 1-minute commercial we have to take, and we'll be right back. Could you stay with us, please?
Sure thing.
Thank you so much. Hold on, please. Folks, don't go away. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
Steve Harden of the Harden Insurance Agency has over 30 years of experience designing family insurance protection, including retirement planning. Call 918-488-0024 or go to hardenagency.com and request a free in-depth estate and retirement evaluation. We look forward to earning your trust and helping you meet your life goals.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. With us, we have Dr. Robert Lawson with us. He's the author of the World Economic Freedom Index, and we're discussing the placement of the United States and relative to other countries on the index and why we are where we are today. Dr. Lawson, thank you very much for staying with us. I hope you're still there.
I'm still here.
Okay, very good. Well, as you know, I received an alert this morning that the Skype network was down globally. So that's why we don't have you on video as we normally would have. So we assume that's still, I guess, Preston, is that still, Skype is still down, right?
I mean, it might be up now.
Oh, you don't know?
I mean, it looks like...
Well, I guess we'll continue the way, because if we fidget with it, we'll lose you altogether. Anyway, all right, now, the politicians running for office never reference the World Freedom Index, and they espouse the fact that the United States is the freest country in the world. Why isn't anyone screaming, saying, no, numbnuts, we're not? And especially the mainstream media, the people who are doing the questioning, no one brings this up. Is there no substance at all? I mean, is there no interest in it all? Or is this so politically driven that they just want to make sure that they get the message which they plan to put out to keep us indoctrinated and thinking that we are the freest country in the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I think some of this is us. I mean, the people that are fawning over Trump right now, the people that are fawning over Bernie Sanders, just generally speaking, the voters. It's not like we're clamoring for more economic freedom. Voters are going to these politicians with our hands out, saying, "Hey, give me more, I need a job, I need more, give me higher minimum wage." And it's like little baby chicks in the nest. We've got our mouths out, and politicians are even if they really do deeply care about economic freedom, they're going to respond to the incentives that they face, and the way they get elected and the way they maintain their careers is to give the little chicks the food they want. And so I think it's easy to blame politicians, but I actually tend to think politicians are more reacting to the incentives that voters are giving them. I think the enemy is us.
Right.
And unfortunately that's a harder thing to fix. I mean, it's easier to change a few politicians' minds, and you can change the world, but to really affect policy change, you need to change the minds of millions of voters.
It always surprises me that the libertarian candidates, the likes of a Ron Paul, do so poorly in the polls, and yet when they speak, they garner the largest crowds. And I recall back when he was running for office, in some cities, his crowds would be infinitely larger than his competitors, and yet he would get the fewest number of votes. And you have to think that these people went out there to listen to Ron Paul, to cheer him on, to support him and the whole bit, but the next day they never showed up to vote. And I get very, very skeptical of that entire system, and I'm not sure if we have a system that works at all anymore. And I'm getting very cynical in my old age. I'm only 72 and a half years old, so I got a long way to go. But I'm becoming incredibly cynical about our entire system. It's to me, it's a show. It's not a governance. It's a play that we have, and we go through these acts. Then there's intermission, and then we start all over again. And the audience is not really part of the play. They're being entertained by it, and it's really starting to bother me.
I think you nailed it. I mean, the voters themselves are. It's very tribal. It's red versus blue, my team versus your team, and,
right?
And the policy, the ideas, the content of the policies that are being debated are really secondary to that kind of tribalism. Unfortunately, the day after the election, somebody's won. And those policies actually do matter.
Right.
Tax rates matter. Tariff policies matter. And so at the end of the day, although the process for selecting politicians is based on rallies and my guy is better dressed than your guy, or whatever, and that's how we select our leaders. And then they all go to Congress and say, well, we got to pass some laws now.
Yeah.
It's no surprise we get pretty bad laws, when we select that way. I mean, we sort of use a beauty pageant kind of process to decide who gets to run.
Oh, absolutely.
Make these policy decisions.
Yeah. I often think if we one act of legislation that would help turn the tide is something that I don't agree with, but I think would help turn the tide, is if we had the draft again. If we had the draft, we'd have what we had during Vietnam, people taking to the streets saying, hell no, I won't go, type thing. And I think it would raise the awareness of the ugliness and the destructiveness and the illegality of our wars. And that brought on those riots against the Vietnam War, I shouldn't say the war in Vietnam, our invasion of Vietnam, that's more accurate. Our invasion of Vietnam, because I don't think I had any Viet Cong in my neighborhood at the time that were trying to kill me. But what that brought an awareness that war was not good, that we didn't want to participate in overseas entanglements, etc. It brought all that basic American standards that the nation is brought up on. It brought us to the forefront. And it seems that by not having a draft, which I agree, we should not have a draft at all, but by not having it, it sort of put the protest for war in the shadows and actually made it palatable to the people. And now, although, as Ron Paul would say, had said that something like 12 people a day actually commit suicide, because of their involvement in overseas entanglements where they've killed people and they realize that they're really innocent bystanders, but they were ordered to kill. And there's something like 12,000 people a year commit suicide who have been sent overseas. But we never talk about that. We sanitize absolutely everything. So I say, bring back the draft, let's hit the streets and let's riot again, and maybe we can square this nation away. Saying that, how crazy does that sound to you?
Well, a little crazy, but I'll tell you what, we actually have the draft in our index. I mean, there is no bigger violation of your liberty than forcing you to work for the government, which is what the draft does.
Right.
So, as far as the index is concerned, that would be another big hit for the index. But I got to say, I have some sympathy for your broader point, that the system works better when everyone has skin in the game.
Right.
When politics and the policies the politicians pass, they generate benefits for us. We get roads and we get bridges and we get schools. We get all this stuff the governments do, But it works best when people who get the benefits also bear the costs. And increasingly the system is driven so that the benefits go to one group and the costs are borne by another group.
Right.
Well, and that's a really destructive way to make decisions. I mean, it's like when you've been to a wedding with an open bar. The benefits go to the drinking, guests, and the costs go to the bride and groom. Well, we all know what happens when you have an open bar at a wedding. We all get drunk. I mean, it's great. I love those. But,
wait. Allow me to correct it. It usually goes to the parents of the bride and groom.
Indeed.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So we're running our whole government like that now.
Right.
And the sort of the beauty, if you want to call it beauty, of the draft. That's a terrible way to say it, but is that the supposed benefits of the war in Vietnam, let's just say that, the supposed benefits were also going to be borne by a widespread portion of the population. The costs were going to be borne.
Right.
And then we could have an honest discussion about whether the benefits of this war are worth the costs. Well, I think I agree with you. They weren't worth the costs. But it was easier to make that determination when the costs were so visible and borne by lots of people. and now more and more, it's people think, hey, government's going to give me something, and there's no cost. Well, someone else will pay for that. Well, there's no someone else. Someone else is still all of us.
That's right.
We're all big one thing here.
That's right.
So, but that's the way the system is increasingly set up, though. I benefit at your expense. Well, hey, I'm all for that. I love benefiting at someone else's expense. I like open bars. But it's not a good way to run a country.
Yeah. Well, in the World Freedom Economic Index, which indicators are improving for the U.S. and which ones are degrading, if you will, or dragging us down? Is it all down, or are there a few going better in one direction and others going in the opposite direction?
I can't think of any that are going up.
Oh my God!
So
I didn't expect that.
I mean, quite a few are just level.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one would be mentioned the deficit. It's not as bad as it was a couple years ago, so that number's up a little bit. But on a 10-point scale, it means it's gone from a 2 to a 4. Yeah. So it's still really bad.
Right.
But mostly they're going to be level, but I'd say at least half of the numbers are down, and some of them are down. Again, on our 10-point scale, they're down 2 or 3 points. I mean, big declines. Yeah. And so, I don't think there's anything there's not a lot of bright spots in the U.S. In the U.S. page on the book.
Now, if the deficits continue, well, according to Michael Tanner, who's been doing work in this regard, the deficits will start increasing 2016. And then we're going to see a gigantic spike, mostly because of the entitlements. And that's, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, Social Security, et cetera. And that accounts for 75% of our deficit. And the line is almost vertical, just straight up from here on in, and to a point where it envelopes everything. Taking that in consideration, what's going to happen if he is correct? What happens to our economic index? Is that weighed very, very heavily, or is that a very small portion of the index?
Yeah, that's a pretty small portion of the index. I mean, it would be worth another 1/10 of a point. So I mean, it would be meaningful. In the terms of rankings, it would probably cost another 10 spots or something like that. So that'd be very meaningful. And he's absolutely right, by the way. I mean, there's the Social Security and Medicare thing, which we've all known is going to be happening. Is this train that's been coming down the tracks right at us we've known about this since the Reagan era. It's happening. It's going to happen. There's no way to miss it at this point. So he's correct on the facts there. The only real thing is whether it hits in 16 or 17. I mean, it's a matter of timing is the only debate. So yeah, it's going to hurt the index. But fiscal things are important in the index. But again, most of the declines have been in non-fiscal areas. Like I said, these property right numbers, things like that.
Is there anything that if you had to select one item to say, this is one item we must work on, this would improve our Freedom Economic Index the most, which one would it be, and what would you do?
Well, these massive omnibus regulatory laws, Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, Obamacare, I think those big, 5,000, 10,000 page laws have been the single biggest driver of the numbers going down that we've seen. Yeah. These things are unbelievably unwieldy. I mean, again, as you know, we have to pass these things to find out what's in them.
Right. I love that.
And it's not just Obamacare where that happens.
Right.
I mean, Dodd-Frank, we're still figuring out what this thing means.
Right.
And they're writing the laws, the regulations as we speak.
Yeah.
These things are the most destructive forces to economic activity that anyone's ever invented. No one in business, everyone in business, let's put it this way, everyone in business is just scared to death of the next Dodd-Frank regulation or the next Obamacare hit that's going to hit, regulation.
Right.
That's going to, drive their employees' health care costs up. And There's not like a law that like stop, stop doing these laws. I'm not saying you have to undo them or anything like that. I mean, sure, I'd love to repeal these things, but just stop adding fuel to the fire. Let businesses figure out the rules. Let them have some breathing room so that they can get back to the business at hand, which is producing goods and services for consumers, hiring workers, and so on. But right now, it's just a sclerosis in the economy. And I think it's driven by these massive regulatory hits. And it's not just that it's new regulations, it's that no one knows what the regulations are. And when you don't know what the regulations are, you have a tendency just to sit down and wait it out. And I think that's what we're seeing.
It seems that we went from a country where individuals got up off their own duff and did something, and they didn't wait for somebody. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't look to the government for but today it seems as if we don't do anything until we get permission from the government, or we find out if the government would approve it. And it seems to be a total reversal of what this country was based on, this individual initiative and individual freedom. And now we're always looking for permission from the government to move. And as a result, it stifles a lot of people's initiative. I think probably is very destructive as far as individual jobs and entrepreneurship is concerned. Is that's my own paranoia because I'm getting older, or do you have that same sense?
I think you're right. I mean, I guess after a couple of drinks I could be an anarchist, but I kind of buy into the argument that there's a sort of traffic cop value in having a government around. Traffic cops at the intersection make the traffic go through the intersection faster.
Right.
It makes our lives easier.
Right.
As opposed to just letting everybody run into the intersection like crazy.
Right.
So having a traffic cop in our economy to sort of set up some basic rules. Hey, everybody drives on the right. Everybody here, you go, now you go. That's a valuable role for the government to play. But what's a bad role to play is a guy with a roadblock.
Right.
When a traffic cop turns into a roadblock and saying, hey, stop, I need to talk to you for the next 20 minutes and make sure you're doing the right thing. Well, that's not actually helping us get through the intersection. It's actually slowing us down. Yeah. And government is slowly but surely over the last, however long, 100 years, really 200 years, has been moving away from the traffic cop model to the roadblock model. And, they're not helping.
Yeah.
So, they need to stop. I mean, it's that easy to say. But again, I'm pretty depressed because I don't think the system is set up. All the rewards go to the guy who sets up the roadblock.
Yeah. Well, I look at
the traffic cop is not a very glorious job.
I look at our economy as one in which we didn't have intersections. We had traffic circles where everyone approached a traffic circle and was responsible for they were responsible for themselves getting to the other side without hitting anyone, and there was no traffic cop. And maybe that's a poor analogy, but that's the way I view it. And everything, now traffic did slow down at the traffic circle, but that was all self-preservation because you didn't want to hit anyone, and neither did you want anyone to hit you. So there was self-responsibility, and I think if we use a traffic circle analogy, it sort of it sort of indicates to us where we were and where we are today, where we're all sitting at red lights today, waiting for someone to pass us on, and of course, very little traffic flows that way. Well, let me ask you this. We're almost out of time. I'm going to ask you a couple of more questions, if you don't mind. I want you to play Wizard, if you can. If I had to ask you 10 years from now or 5 years from now, where would the U.S. fall on the economic index? And if there was an economic crisis, which many portend will occur because our 0% interest rate insanity is eventually going to give out and something's going to crack somewhere. So there's two questions. Where do you think we're going? And if we had an economic disruption, and I don't want to say collapse because that sounds conspiratorial, but some sort of big economic disruption, what do you think would happen to the U.S. Economic Freedom Index?
I'm notwithstanding all the pessimism of most of our conversation, I'm still pretty optimistic about the structural soundness of the U.S. economy and our norms and culture and so on. So I don't think. I guess I would have lost the bet though already. If you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, would the U.S. go to 16th? I would have said no way, and we did. So I would have lost that bet. So I'm gonna double down on my bet. I'm gonna say the U.S. really won't go down much more.
Okay.
We're gonna go. We could go down to 20th or something like that. But for us to get in, I cannot imagine it getting that in a 10 or 15 year time horizon. Us getting down to the level of Greece or France, which are they're in the 70s. They're basically in the middle of the pack of the whole world. That's not really conceivable. And the idea of a real crisis. I mean, I think there's a real good chance that we're going to have some rotating crises over the next few years. But even so, I don't think it's going to be devastating to the American standard of living or anything of that sort. I mean, the big complaint is you hate to lose a generation. I mean, you hate to go a generation without good economic growth, because that means my kids will live like I live, and I want my kids to live better than me. And so,
right.
I don't think there's much chance that our children are going to be worse off than us, but I think there's a pretty good chance they won't be much better off, which is still, kind of sad.
Well, it's strange because I think we already lost a generation. See, I'm coming from a different perspective, and maybe because I'm coming from a different era altogether. And I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but I just suspect that you are a few years younger than me. Okay, and Mario, and let me give you a very Dick and Jane simplified overview of the economy. When I was young, I owned a car. Of course, a car didn't cost much then. We used to get 51 Buicks for $100, with 8-cylinder engines in them, straight to 8s. But we owned a car, and we went to a service station, and we paid 25 cents, 50 cents for gasoline to put it in just to get around that night. And there's two things that we owned when we were young. We owned the car that we were driving, and we owned the gasoline and oil that was in it. Today, you find people that age, young people, who are going out and have no money, but no problem because there's no payments till next year, and they're buying a $35,000, $45,000 car, of which payments are been deferred for an entire year. So they're having a great time. Insurance is out of sight. And when they go to the service station, they use a credit card, and they put the credit card in the machine and in the gas pump, And there's two things they don't have that I had. They don't really own their car, nor do they own the gasoline that's in it. So I look at things from an overall perspective of where were we and where are we now. So in my opinion, we already lost a generation. The question is, will we lose the next generation? I'm sorry if I'm so doom and gloomy, but I'm just giving you a comparison.
The car you paid cash for back then was a piece of junk. So I mean, the car we have now, even the cruddiest Korean cars, is a glorious machine.
No, I
safe,
agree.
Reliable, and so I mean, things are different, but I mean, it also looks a lot better. I don't want to drive in that Chevy Nova that was death trap. So I mean, I hear you though. I mean, it's absolutely true that people taking on leverage, people borrowing for consumer goods like cars is pretty doggone stupid. It's a matter of personal finance.
Yeah, I guess my point is that I
think
agree
it's
with
more
you.
about personal finance than it is, the nation.
Yeah. Well, it seems that people are broke. I mean, even people in the studio, if I pick on these young fellas, I ask them how much they have in college debt, when they tell me, I mean, I have some sort of aneurysm or something, when they tell me the amount. And then I say, how much you have in credit card debt? And they tell me, they say, how much I have in credit card debt? They tell me. I mean, I would start a business with that amount of money. And yet that's very commonplace today. So I don't see the generation coming is doing better. I see the generation that's coming on is being mired in debt and with a very, very little flexibility, especially with all the onerous legislation that's going on. I don't see if their economic index staying the same. I see it, from my perspective, as being degraded in many ways from a practical point of view.
Well, I tend to agree to the point that these are really bad personal finance decisions for lots of people. I guess the question, and I don't have the answer myself, is what kind of systemic risk does this give us? I mean, yeah, a lot of people have borrowed way too much for college. That's for sure. But is that going to cause us some kind of a financial crisis? I don't know. I mean, we have a pretty resilient financial system to absorb losses. Again, I could be wrong on this. I mean, but my sense is that the people that are lending money to all these dumb people, and they're not dumb, they're just, but the people that are lending them know that they're going to get a certain percentage of their loan money back, and it's kind of built into the system. So it's when you get the huge disconnect, like we did with the housing bubble and housing crisis, where, I mean, you really do have way too much money out there that can't get paid back, and that's when you get the financial crisis. The financial system is built to absorb losses too, so it's just not quite clear that it's too much, and it's never clear, and that's the doggone crazy thing. It's never clear until it's too late.
Right. Well, Robert, we're just about out of time at this time, so I'd like to wrap things up. I do hope I did not depress you with my negative thoughts too much, but I hope that my thoughts were valid at least, and you would give us some thought. We certainly appreciate all the words that you've given us and your insight. I would love to have you back maybe 6 months or a year from now, and maybe we can have this conversation over again and compare the conversation we had today with the conversation we're going to have then. Would you accept that invitation?
Sure thing, anytime.
Okay, that's great. I'd like to leave the last minute to you for you to wrap up and tell our audience about yourself.
Well, here at SMU, I am the director of this thing called the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom, and if anyone's ever on the SMU campus in Dallas, drop by. But if you're in the area, we do all kinds of programs. We've got a big conference next week with George Will coming to talk, and
wow.
I go around. I'm going to be at Oklahoma State tomorrow to talk. So,
oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, it's up near you, I think.
That's
so.
Sure is, yeah.
We're out there and about there. Check us out on the internet. It's easy to find. It's the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom, and check us out.
Okay, Robert, thank you so much for being our guest, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, folks, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.